Mostly what I think of a good console and what makes it good are its games. Because that's what it needs, games. And most good consoles have good games. That's why most good consoles are considered good consoles. Then there are also bad consoles that mostly have bad games, but sometimes a developer will accidentally put out a good game on a bad or a failed console. We're going to count those down. Hi guys, this is DPX counting down for you today the top 10 good games on bad or failed consoles. Now, what rules are there? Well, one game per franchise, and also one game per console. I'm not having two games from the same console. So, that's it. Anyway guys, let's get started, but before we do that, you know what to do. Be sure to like this video, subscribe if you're new, turn on notifications, and leave a comment. And you'll be a loyal subscriber.
I wanted to give to you, the last part of your notes here, the significance spiritually of the number 10.
Sega had a lot of failed consoles, so expect more games from their consoles on here. But one of them was the Sega CD. The Sega CD was an add-on for the Sega Genesis to expand the life by adding a CD-based console, or CD-based games, really. But it failed miserably. And though you might have expected Sonic CD, the original version of that game wasn't that great, but it was the Christian Whitehead remake that you probably played. However, the Sega CD also had Snatcher. Snatcher is kind of like a point-and-click adventure in a dark future that has a bunch of robots and aliens and shit. It's really cool. It actually uses the CD technology to a point that's not really that cringy like most of the other games on the Sega CD did, and it is honestly great. There's even something in here called Metal Gear, and yep, Hideo Kojima was behind this game. We go from one CD-based console that failed to another with the Panasonic 3DO Interactive Multiplayer. That's all the titles. The 3DO was meant to rival the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis, and even called those consoles baby toys in their advertisement. However, whether it was due to the poor marketing or the $700 price tag, which would be over $1.2K when adjusted for inflation, the console flopped hard. However, unlike most consoles on this list, the 3DO actually had a lot of great titles as the technology was open for it. Stuff like Road Rash, Need for Speed, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, or Samurai Showdown were all considered for this list, but it was Star Control 2. The 3DO version had better graphics, sound design, and many tweaks to make the game easier to play. It's actually pretty advanced and impressive for the 3DO, and yeah, this is the definitive way to play the game. If you want to play Star Control 2, you should play it on here. The problem is it's the 3DO, but get it on an emulator, because it's pretty good, and it's just plain sick.
So I'm going to be giving this flavor 8.5 out of 10 scoops.
King of Fighters, one of the biggest fighting game franchises of all time, recently became popular due to Terry Bogard's appearance in Smash, at least popular in the States. You might not have even known that there are 14 numbered entries, and even some non-numbered entries in the franchise. So this franchise is huge. Now, what about this makes you think handheld console with a weird button layout and a very small screen, and it's also supposed to be a console and phone hybrid? Well, that's very simple. King of Fighters Extreme was a game on the Nokia N-Gage. The Nokia N-Gage was exactly the console I just described, and was also meant to rival the Game Boy Advance. How did it fare though? Well, just as well as anything else that tried to rival any Game Boy did. Or in fact, any handheld console from Nintendo, as you'll see later. At least it had a good King of Fighters game, though. That being said, King of Fighters Extreme plays just like a normal King of Fighters game, and the limitations of the N-Gage's controls don't taint this game that much. I don't expect this game to be at the next EVO or anything, but it's a fine game on a not-so-fine console.
36.
Very close, but that's not it. Let's go to Gary the Retard. What number between 2 and 4?
7.
I did say we were going back to more Sega consoles since they got some bad ones. So, let's talk about the Sega 32X. At least the CD kind of made a little bit of sense to exist, as the Sega Genesis had cartridges. The CD was supposed to be like the CD add-on. But I don't think the Sega 32X was necessary in any way, shape, or form. It was made for the same reason the CD was, being to expand the life of the Genesis, but it did anything but. And all it really had that added onto the Genesis was that it was able to play games in 32-bit. But most of the games were also on other 16-bit systems at the time, making it completely useless and pointless. However, one game that actually looked quite impressive for the time and actually utilized the 32X's 32 bits pretty well was Blackthorn, a hidden gem. This game kinda looks dumb now, but trust me, it was probably a huge deal back at the time. Well, it probably wasn't because nobody played it. Plus, Blackthorn is a cinematic platformer, something similar to the Oddworld games, the Prince of Persia games, or Flashback. It is also worth noting that this game was also on the SNES and DOS computers, but in my opinion, it looks the best on the 32X.
Okay, Mrs. Puff, what's my final score?
6.
Woo!
The Philips CDI, oh boy. Most notorious for...
I hope she made lots of spaghetti, 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 spaghetti. Spaghetti.
Whether it's because of stuff like that, or the console being priced at $1,000 at the time, the Philips CDI was kinda shite. And it's hard to think that there would be any good game on it. But there is, and that game is called The Apprentice. Unlike most games on the CDI, The Apprentice actually doesn't utilize the CD technology like every CD system did at the time, nor is it cringy because of that. And it just did its own thing. Its own thing is a 2D side-scrolling platformer, something not so common on the Philips CDI, at least a good one. It's got everything you possibly want from one of those games. The Apprentice has pretty much everything you possibly want from one of those games from that era too. It's almost like it was accidentally put on one of the worst consoles of all time.
Oh, chills. Literal chills.
It was number 5. Number 5 is my brother.
Oh my god, I forgot about
The PS Vita wasn't necessarily bad, but it sure did fail. The Vita lacked must-own exclusive games, like how most consoles kinda need. And that's also, weirdly enough, why the best game on the Vita is Persona 4 Golden. Yep, the best Vita game was sort of like a definitive addition to Persona 4 on the PS2. Persona 4 Golden, however, is the much more preferable option. It even looks pretty good for a handheld game. Not to mention with the added new features, and it's a lot of fun, and definitely a must-own version of Persona 4 if you're a fan of the series, and if you have the Vita. It's easy to say that the Vita did in fact have its own games, this being one of them. However, if you want to talk about games that, you know, weren't like definitive editions of other games, maybe Uncharted Golden Abyss. I almost had that on the list, but I feel like this game deserves to be on it over that one. The entry is Persona 4 Golden, I'm just saying.
7, 5. Number 4.
Much like the Vita, the Wii U was another console that wasn't really that bad, but sure did fail. Unlike most consoles, the Wii U actually lacked non-exclusives this time, and was a good console if you only wanted to play Nintendo games, that is. Also, it caused a lot of confusion when it was first revealed as the new controller and not once as the new console. The Wii U flopped so hard that just about every great game it did have were either ported to the Switch or had better sequels or follow-ups on the Switch. The only two that stand out to me that haven't gotten that treatment yet, and I say yet, are Pikmin 3 and Super Mario 3D World. And I'm sure a lot of you love Pikmin more, but I'm putting Mario on the list. And I know 3D World was criticized for being just a 3D version of basic Mario, and it got repetitive at that time. And yes, this game is not perfect, but it's a fun enough game. With its colorful and beautiful visuals, the unique bosses, or the ability to choose your character like in Mario 2, Super Mario 3D World honestly doesn't get enough credit in my opinion. Okay, want to go back to talking about consoles that both sucked and failed? Let's talk the Atari Jaguar, a console that got a bit of a head start in the 5th generation console wars with the N64 and the PS1, and claiming to be 64-bit when in reality the games didn't really prove that. Have that and throw in marketing that called people stupid and whatever the fuck the controller was, you might not think that there would be a good game on this system, but lo and behold, Alien vs. Predator exists. This is unique, as though it's called Alien vs. Predator and you get to play as those two, you can also play as a colonial marine, which changes the dynamic and perspective of the game. Not to mention how stunning the visuals were at the time, even if they weren't 64 bits, and the atmosphere the game gave you made the Jaguar from being Atari's last dud of a console to Atari's last dud of a console, but with a really good game.
What kind of pencil do we take again?
Number 2. Take a number 2.
Looks like you took a big number.
Last Sega console I'm talking today is the Sega Saturn. Failed for multiple reasons. I don't want to get into all of them, since that can probably make its own video, but the main reason behind its failure has to do with the surprise launch, as it was just randomly dropped and launched in the middle of like an E3 press conference or something like that, when it was supposed to launch like a few months later. This led to many developers not even wanting to develop games for the system, retailers like completely unaware, and some consumers who have been saving up for the Saturn not ready to make the purchase. This ultimately doomed Sega as well. However, at least it had Panzer Dragoon Saga though. What a great game. Panzer Dragoon Saga is the on-rail shooter similar to Star Fox. With its tight controls, Panzer Dragoon Saga is a fantastic game, and it was actually one of the last games on the Saturn before Saturn support halted. So, before we get to number 1, let's look at some honorable mentions. Ah yes, you knew I was gonna talk about the Virtual Boy, if it was just bad consoles. How are there good games? There's like 24 games! Yes, you see the PSVR, Oculus, or even the Labo VR kit nowadays. But that last one, Labo VR kit, wasn't Nintendo's first attempt at virtual reality. Nope, it was actually the Virtual Boy. The public just wasn't ready for VR though yet, and the Virtual Boy was discontinued in less than a year, and is one of the worst selling consoles of all time. But one thing it did have was a good Wario game. That's right, not Mario, Zelda, Pokemon, Donkey Kong, but Wario. Motherfucking Wario gave the worst console of all time its only good game. Damn. Virtual Boy Wario Land is a Wario Land game, and a solid one at that, and utilizes the foreground and the background pretty well. I'd honestly love to see this game remade and remastered as well on the Switch or something, as the only problem I have with this game is that it's on Virtual Boy. If that's the only problem I can think of, then it should be on another console right now. Well, that's my list. Do you agree with me? Do you not agree with me? Let me know in the comments below. If you should like this video, come subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.